Allergy Learning Curve, 10 Steps to Shorten It with Style. And as I get used to this little setup here, my name is Elisabeth Veltman, and I'm a writer. I'm a strategist, that's my profession, and I'm also a food allergy blogger now. And I've been doing a blog called The Tender Foodie for about 2 years, and it started because I realized that this learning curve was incredibly difficult for people when they first get diagnosed with any kind of food issue, whether it's a gluten allergy, intolerance, or celiac disease, or any type of food allergy, if you're allergic to peanuts. And I also realized that food allergies impact every area of your life. And if you don't understand these 10 steps, then it's difficult for you, for anyone, to heal quickly, because you're constantly making mistakes. So this may be, you may be overwhelmed, you may be a veteran, and I may overwhelm you more, but just let yourself kind of take the information in, and you can always email me with questions later. I'm happy to answer them. So just a little bit about the blog. I write, and I also have invited, and keep inviting experts from different areas of the food allergy lifestyle. And one of them is pastry chef Kira Bosanic, who is the first gluten-free champion of Cupcake Wars. She put her gluten-free cupcakes up against everyone else in the country, and she's won twice. And she came in the championship round, she came in second. So she's the only one who's ever done that. So that's really cool that she's with us. We also have Brandy Wendler, who's an acute care nurse practitioner who has celiac disease also. Both of these women do. And she also is a specialist in heart disease. So that's her platform, as she goes around the country talking about these two diseases as a former Mrs. Alaska and Mrs. Northwest International. So we've got a beauty queen and a nurse on the roster, which is cool. We've also involved Alessio Fasano, MD, who's a researcher and the one who discovered gluten sensitivity a couple of years ago, this new disease that is popping up, this new immune reaction to gluten that's popping up. And so you'll hear his name throughout the presentation as well. And there's other nutritionists, dietitians, chefs, and there's a child feeding therapist. So I have a bunch of people on the blog to help support everyone. And then the Tender Palate is an upcoming website that will be interactive and provide tools to help shorten that learning curve even more. So that's who I am. Does anybody ever feel like this? Who knows what gluten is, really? Who really knows what gluten is? Let's start with that.
Want to read the caption? We'll start there.
Yeah. Well, this may surprise you and it may not, I'm not sure, but gluten is actually a composite of 2 proteins. Gliadin, which is the culprit, that's why I have it in green, and glutenin. They're both found in wheat, rye, barley, triticale, and also in many, many processed foods, not because they're inherent in the ingredients, but because of the processing practice. And why is it a problem now? This is something I usually talk about later because it packs kind of a punch, but I thought we should talk about it first since this is a gluten-free food fair. That Dr. Fasano has said that no one has the ability, the enzyme, to digest gluten, not one human being on the planet. And I found that fascinating, that an enzyme is something that takes your food and breaks it down into particles small enough into nutrients that your small intestine can absorb so that your body can be fed. We'll take questions afterwards. I forgot to say that, I'm sorry, otherwise we'll never get out of here. So once you eat the gluten, there usually is a bacteria in the intestines. That's one of the ways that our body protects itself, that turns off the adverse reaction to the gliadin protein. So we've been eating gluten for years, right? And a lot of us haven't had any problems, but now suddenly there's this big explosion, and that's one thing that I asked him when I interviewed him, is why this happened. And he said that the protein content of gliadin in particular has gone up by 14% because of genetic modification. So we like gluten because it makes our bread tasty, and it makes it soft and yummy, and so that's why we, as a country and as a world has been trying to figure out how to make it more gluteny, more spongy, our bread. So, but the result of that is that our body sees all of this protein in the bread itself, but also in our processing. It's present in all kinds of stuff, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is rather shocking. And so our bodies before could ignore and repair itself. But now, with all of this protein, our immune systems are going, what's going on, right? So the theory is this bacteria has been helping us turn off that adverse reaction to gluten, but our antibiotic environment with overprescription of antibiotics, antibiotic hand soaps, the sanitizers, kill that wonderful good bacteria and takes away that defense mechanism that we have. Does that make sense? So there has been a big change in the market. And we'll get to this 10 steps in a minute. I just want to give you a little background so that we're all on the same page. Big companies like Conagra Mills are finding that 80% of the gluten-free market is being driven by core consumers. And they're people on a diet for medical reasons, right? They're not doing this because it's a fad or because they want to lose weight or whatever, but they have real health problems that they're trying to figure out how to cure. And this is kind of a picture of the U.S. health. You've got dairy issues from lactose intolerance to different types of reactions between 35 and 50 million people. 50 didn't fit on the slide. Gluten sensitivity, they expect this new gluten sensitivity to be over 20 million people. People that have classic food allergies, which can result in anaphylaxis, is 15 million. Celiac disease has quadrupled in the last 50 years, the diagnosis of celiac disease, and I know there's some new numbers out there now. I talked to somebody yesterday, and there's some new numbers out there now that has made, it's not just 1 in 133 people, but there's a greater more people that are being diagnosed with celiac disease now. And then it goes on to other diseases where people are trying different diets. Autism has increased by 78%. The CDC is linking it to chemicals in our food, our air, and our environment. Multiple sclerosis has doubled in women in the last 10 years. There's all these diseases that are using a special diet to try to help cure themselves. So that's just a little background. So the first step to living an allergen-free life with some style is to know what you have and really understand your reaction to food. And one reason I put this, we're going to spend like probably most of the time in the first 5 slides, is that I've talked to a lot of people that leave the doctor's office and they don't know if they need an EpiPen. They don't know if they need, they're told to just go avoid bread and or just go avoid gluten and not have any idea what that means. And I see people who do know that they're supposed to avoid bread at a restaurant, not being able to stop themselves from taking that roll from the basket. People with celiac disease. So this is one reason why I really stress this, because if you don't know what you have, you can't heal yourself properly. If you don't know what you have, you can't communicate with your doctors or find the right doctors for you. If you don't know what you have, how are you going to talk to your family and friends? How are you going to explain it to people who cook for you and who are in your lives? So they don't look at you and say, I just don't get it. You're weird. Which happens, right? Sometimes. So the 8 most common allergens, you've probably heard this before, and if not, here they are. Peanuts, tree nuts, soy, dairy, gluten, which we now know a little more about, eggs, fish, seafood. And these are what the FDA has claimed to be the top 90% of all allergens in our food. And so this has started the labeling, which is great. But there's multiple allergies coming up that include corn, soy, potato. I'm allergic to parsley. I know somebody's allergic to thyme. So there's all these multiple allergies that are starting to come up in our lives. And cross reactions, which is another layer about this whole thing, where a protein that resembles the food you're allergic to your body sees it. For instance, tapioca has a protein that is similar to gluten. So some people react to the tapioca as if it were gluten because your body thinks that it's gluten, right? Or specifically gliadin. So do you have an allergy, an intolerance, a sensitivity? Is this a diet choice? Do you have celiac disease? Are you just being a pain in the tuchus, as my grandmother would say? Well, I guarantee you it's not the last. So a food allergy, there's 3 types of food allergies. And I talked to Dr. Fasano, and I talked to a woman named Sheila George, who's a medical doctor and a Chinese herbalist who specializes in cancer and the immune system. So I have a couple heavy hitters that have agreed on these definitions so that I can break them down into some plain language for us to understand, because the immune system is super complicated. I don't get it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. But I've worked with them to help so that we all can kind of understand what this means. So a food allergy is an immune response to food where the immune sees a protein in the food as dangerous. And it defends itself from that foreign object with something called inflammation, which we hear a lot about, right? So there's 3 types of this type of reaction called a food allergy. There's the classic, which can result in anaphylaxis, which is a full body reaction that affects your respiratory system, which can shut down and kill you within a few minutes. That's when people need to carry an EpiPen, right? There's a delayed reaction, which is immediate. You can have something immediate, but it can also appear up to 72 hours later. So that's why a delayed reaction is so difficult to diagnose. And there's over 100 different symptoms from mild to severe. You can have a little runny nose, or you could swell up like a balloon. You could have flu-like symptoms and ache all over. You could have horrible digestive issues. Those are just to name a few. There's a ton of symptoms. I blow up like a balloon. My knuckles and everything kind of blow up. There's a hybrid sensitivity, which is very complex. This is the new reaction that we've had. That Dr. Fasano discovered, and that's where the gluten sensitivity falls in. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease where the immune system actually attacks the body. That's what happens. The immune system in every autoimmune disease will turn on itself. And celiac disease turns on the small intestine and causes severe damage if it's untreated. And the cool thing about celiac disease is it's the only autoimmune disease that has a trigger that we know. And so we take the trigger away, we cure the symptoms. Multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, this could help researchers knowing that there's a trigger that could potentially cause those diseases. If they can find that trigger, maybe they can turn it off. And maybe people can be cured of their symptoms. So that's the cool thing about celiac disease, if you can find a cool thing about it. So when your small intestine is damaged, you have a hard time being fed. You can't absorb nutrients, right? And we're going to illustrate that a little bit. So on the left there, it's the left for you, right? I'm not standing in front of this for anybody, am I? I am? Okay, sorry. I'll go back over here. So on the left, we have a normal villi. What the inside of the small, these are actual picture of the inside of the small intestine. So you have these little finger-like projections there are the villi. And that's where the food, travels around, and some of it's broken down properly, and the stuff that's broken down properly falls into the little fingers, it gets caught, it absorbs into your system, and you get fed. On the right, that's when those fingers are gone. So this is here. Those fingers are gone. So the food goes around, the nutrients bounce off the top through like a smooth tube, and there's nothing there to catch the nutrients so that you don't get fed. Does that make sense? It's serious stuff. You don't want to grab the bread from the table just once in a while. Oh, I want to have, my dad makes my favorite lasagna with real noodles and I'm just going to suffer for a day. Don't do that, because this is what happens to you. And the long-term damage can be really severe. It can aid in osteoporosis, you can get tooth enamel defects, central and peripheral nervous system disease, hurt your pancreas, you can have internal hemorrhaging, infertility, your gallbladder, your liver and spleen can start being affected and destroyed, and there's even links that to certain types of cancer, in particular intestinal lymphoma. So again, something that take kind of seriously. I've always had this nightmare that I wake up in some foreign prison somewhere, in, desert, and all I had was bread and water. And this was like, I'd wake up in a sweat. And so when I found this comic, I thought that was hilarious, that somebody else probably had the same dream. So here's another view of the small intestine. And this can happen to people with celiac disease, and that's one reason if it's untreated, they can also develop multiple food allergies. You don't have to have celiac disease to develop multiple food allergies either. And why this happens is a more commonly recognized diagnosis called leaky small intestine. So what happens is you've got large particles floating through. They want to get absorbed. It's particularly gluten because it's not broken down, and if it's not turned off in our intestines by that bacteria, or we don't handle it well, there's too much, then we want to get fed. So they try to get through to the small intestine. If it can't, it breaks up. And so too large of particles get into our system, and it triggers our immune system. It's a foreign object, inflame. And it only has to happen one time for an inflammation. Your body, you recognize it at first, and the next time it'll have antibodies, boom, against it. So that's another look at the small intestine and how that works. So gluten sensitivity is just like celiac disease in the way you react, but it doesn't cause that damage to your small intestine, they don't think. They haven't found that it's caused that damage to your small intestine. So if you do make a mistake, it's not as serious, supposedly. That's what people say. But you still don't want to make a mistake. Why would you want to put yourself in that kind of distress? A lot of people say it's not as bad or whatever, but why would you want to put yourself, your body, in that kind of distress? So it's a real clinical diagnosis, and they say clinical because there's no blood test for it, but there's still over 100 different symptoms, and it affects over 20 million people. A non-immune reaction is an intolerance. That's where your immune system doesn't start to develop antibodies, but you can't digest it, so it affects your gastrointestinal system. Does that make sense? So that's where we have to kind of separate this language so we understand, so we're not like afraid to say what we have. Lactose intolerance has been around for a long time. You just take the lactose, you get lactose-free milk. People do really well on that. Some people have to take it out entirely. But if you want to see more of a complete list, there's an article on the Tender Foodie. You can see more. And I'm bringing this up too. Oral allergy syndrome is something else to talk to your doctor about if you have these symptoms, because you want to make sure, is it oral allergy syndrome, or are you having some kind of allergic reaction? And this is where you have a cross reaction with something pollen. Usually people with hay fever get this. So it's a different type of immune reaction. And you can find out more at foodallergy.org, which is the FAIR website. They have a lot more information on that. So if you have a pollen allergy, and you're cross-reacting, you might eat strawberries if you're allergic to birch and get I think those are the two that go together, itchy mouth. And you might think you're having an anaphylactic reaction. You may or may not be. So you want to talk to your doctor about that. It's just something to be aware of. All right, so step 2, find the right doctor. Testing isn't enough. You really need a doctor who's going to partner with you, who's going to give you a physical exam. You want to keep a food and symptom diary. Bring any labels of the foods that you think you're reacting to. This is like a little research mission. A geheime Mission, as they say in German. A little secret mission that you have to go on with your physicians. Bring any allergy tests that you've had done before, so they have all of the information that they need, and then know what kind of test you're getting. Really get involved in the testing that you're getting so you understand it. Okay? Make them explain it to you. Discuss potential underlying causes and treatments. Maybe you have parasites or overactive yeast or some other underlying cause that is causing your reaction to food that you need to find. If you find that underlying cause, maybe those reactions to foods will go away. So make sure you talk to them about that. If you need an EpiPen, find out. Make sure you know. And if you do, how do I use it and when? Maybe you don't need one. There are people that leave the office with an EpiPen who don't need one. So make sure you know if you need one and how to use it and when. So is my condition life-threatening or not? And if it is, how? Really understand this stuff, because you'll feel so much better, feel so much more empowered if you can leave with this kind of information. And I'm bringing up the celiac diagnosis here because the latest research, the Center for Celiac Research is recommending that you can avoid a biopsy. If you're afraid you have celiac disease, you can avoid a biopsy by having 4 out of these 5 markers available or turn positive. So if you have the symptoms of a gluten reaction, then that's one marker. A positive blood test for antibodies to gluten, that's a second. Genetic compatibility, this tends to be a genetic disease. That's a third one. If your symptoms resolve when you take gluten out, all gluten out, not just bread, but processed food with gluten, lipstick, everything with gluten out, then that's a 4th marker. So if you get those 4, you might be able to avoid that biopsy because it's intense. But it is also the gold standard. So that's something you have to talk to your doctor and decide for yourself if that's what you want. And there's an article on the blog as well that goes into this in detail, an interview that I did with Dr. Fasano. Just type in celiac disease and you'll find it. So wouldn't it be nice if we had Ryan Gosling just come and take care of this for us and we didn't have to do anything at all? I would really like that a lot myself. But we don't. We have to do a lot of work. So, develop an emergency action plan. There's a great emergency action plan template on the FAIR website, foodallergy.org. So if you have, especially a classic food allergy, print that out and start to fill it out. Know how to react to each type of reaction that you have, to recognize it, what to do if your reaction is severe. Do you need sleep? Do you need to shoot yourself up with an EpiPen? Do you need to, what do you need to do? And then who to include in your plan should action be needed. If you do have a serious reaction, you need to know that people around you know what to do, because it's minutes if you have anaphylaxis, right? And it will also help the people understand if you get glutenated or if you have a reaction to any kind of food and you are suddenly just out. They'll understand a little bit more if you include them in your plan. So read labels. This is actually no fun, but we'll make it fun because we have to. So the law states, and this took me years to figure out. I did not understand this at all. And about 2008, you started seeing the ingredients come up with, you have soy sauce, and you have water, soybean, wheat, salt. That was the first time I realized that soy sauce had wheat. Isn't that crazy? So, also canola, vegetable oils. You could be allergic to soy, and soy is in a lot of vegetable oils. And it depends on how sensitive you are, too. Or how highly refined the oil is and how well they do that refining process. So you really have to know your body and your reactions and really, really be diligent about this. Well, all packaged foods are regulated by the FDA. That includes flavoring, spices, coloring, and any processing aids. So extracts, for instance, vanilla extract. You need to have that to be gluten-free if you're in that category. So what the FDA says is that any of the top 8 allergens we talked about before has to be included in plain English in the ingredients. Did you guys know that? That's a really good thing.
Vanilla extract, yes?
Vanilla extract very well can contain gluten. Yeah.
Where does it come from? Where do they
It's-
get the gluten in the vanilla extract?
Part of the what they put in the ingredients when they make it. I don't have a really good answer for you on that, but I'm going to look. Exactly, yeah. So the law does not require anything that is labeled by the USDA, which is a different organization for food. So meat, poultry, produce, highly refined oils, eggs are not required. Any prescription drug, which often has fillers of wheat, dairy, soy, or other types of gluten, over-the-counter drugs, cosmetics, health and beauty aids, shampoo, shaving cream, toothpaste. That was a recent one for me. A lot of toothpaste, but they don't have to label it. You don't have to see if there's gluten in it. So I just went to a gluten-free toothpaste just until I could figure it out. Alcohol, beer, tobacco, and spirits. Now some companies will put on a may contain label to warn if there's cross-contamination at the factory. Because you have these big factory belts, right? You have wheat might go through, you might be making one type of cereal on that factory belt, and then you make a rice cereal on the same factory belt. They're huge. They have so much cross-contamination in these factories, plus the flour goes around in the air, and it can land on the equipment. So that's why we need those dedicated gluten-free facilities or fat-free facilities in our lives if we have those reactions. And some are both covering themselves and also protecting their consumer by saying, hey, we have stuff that you might be allergic to processed in our factory. It might get on your food. So right now there's no gluten-free law, but there is a proposed law that do you know Jules Shepard of Jules Gluten-Free Flour? She's been a huge advocate for this law and has done a ton of work to get this law passed, along with a bunch of other people. I just happen to know that she has done a lot of work. And the proposed law is that the safety zone is under 20 parts per million, and they've had a lot of experts agree that our body does not see something that's under 20 parts per million. It's really microscopic. And there's other companies like Eden Organics that have internal thresholds that are lower, of less than 5 parts per million. So that law is starting to come, but it's not there yet. So if it's labeled gluten-free, you can't just trust naturally gluten-free. It could be processed in a factory that processes some gluten product. So even if the natural grain itself, like buckwheat or teff or amaranth, is processed, it is in itself inherently gluten-free, it could get cross-contaminated somehow. That's why Bob's Red Mill has 2 factories. One, and you have to look, the label's teeny tiny if you don't know that. For the gluten-free flour, you could have a corn flour from Bob's, and it's not a gluten-free flour. You have to look for the gluten-free corn flour. And a lot of people aren't aware of that they have 2 factories, and they do a great job in their gluten-free factory to really test and source all of their stuff. So, hidden gluten. Does any of these surprise you, this list? There are a lot of broths, chicken, beef, vegetable, that contain it. There's condiments. You have to be a little bit careful with condiments. Contadina tomato sauce, for instance, has got, some of their products have gluten as a thickener. And some condiments have gluten as a thickener in their sauces. Soy sauce we discussed. Nuts and dried fruit can often be processed in a factory that produces grains. Flax and chia seeds, corn, rice noodles, the same thing. I put tater tots in there. I know that's probably a brand name, so I don't know what they're called otherwise, but they can be coated with corn flour. So the potatoes might be totally gluten-free, but if they're coated with corn flour, I called one company, Cascadian Farms, I think, and they said that they couldn't guarantee their corn flour that they coated the little tater tots with was gluten-free. So that's the way we have to think as people that are allergic to something. Hot dogs, bratwurst, sausages often have fillers that are gluten-based. Processed hamburger patties, you know, sometimes you get those processed hamburger patties and they use them as fillers. Coffee. Large coffee roasters have a powder, a white powder, on the machines that help keep the beans from sticking as they go through the plant. Isn't that interesting? And it's got gluten in it. So this was really a surprise to me. So I did some research and found that the smaller coffee roasters don't need that. And some of the big coffee roasters are changing, but they're not talking about it, so we don't know who does it and who doesn't do it right now. But the small roasters, you know, get to know the small roasters in your city if you're a coffee lover like me, and know who serves the restaurants, so that when you order coffee, always ask. Know who your local coffee roasters are, always ask who does the coffee. And if they say one of the coffee roasters that you have checked out and have approved of, get the coffee. And if they don't, get the tea. But don't get stash tea, because there's a couple of stash teas that have barley in it. Isn't that crazy? And we talked about the extracts. This cracked me up. As a writer, this really cracked me up. So we're going to talk a little bit about dairy, because that's the other law group that is confusing. There aren't really any laws specific to dairy except vegan. Vegan does not mean dairy-free. It just means that there's no dairy in the ingredient list. It could be processed in a plant-based dairy. It could be, I'm extremely sensitive to dairy, so I have to have a dairy-free facility for anything that I have. And there can be a significant amount of dairy just through processing, but it's not in the ingredients because they didn't add it to the ingredients, and they don't have to because it's not the law, right? Non-dairy is allowed by law to, I guess when I say there's no law specific to dairy, there are laws specific to dairy. There's just no law specific to dairy-free. Non-dairy can contain by law milk proteins, caseinates, which are required to be labeled as milk. So you want to not just see non-dairy and pick up that box of cookies or that non-dairy milk. You want to look at the ingredients. And if it says dairy-free, that's also not a law. But it tends to be a bit of an industry differentiator. So that's a good way to start your research. If you've got non-dairy, vegan, and dairy-free all lined up in a row, and you don't want to research all of them, get the dairy-free one, look at the label, put it back, write it down, go home, get on the internet, and make sure that the product is right. Then go back to the store and buy it the next time. Does that make sense? It's a lot of work, but you will be really happy you did it. Step number 5 is to do a pantry cleanse. If you're highly allergic to something and you can't have it in the air, you can't have it touch your skin, and you carry an EpiPen, get it out of your house. You know, your family or whoever is in the house with you is just going to have to deal with it. It's far too important. Now, some people can live in a mixed household, and that's up to you how you want to handle that. I live in a mixed household, and it works okay. But I'm also very, very diligent about, I have separate utensils and stuff like that. Check your beauty and personal care products. There are soy, dairy, different types of gluten products, wheat particular, nuts in your personal care products. And avoid bulk foods, because you don't know where that scoop has been. You don't know where that bulk food came from. So anything can get carried from scoop to scoop as customers mix them up, and who knows where it's been on the truck, and it's not labeled. You just have to avoid the bulk food, which really, you know, is too bad because it can keep the expense down. Step number 6 is to really understand the ABCs of cross-contamination. So I try to make it clever so you'll remember it. So if you lift and separate, like Playtex, and keep the allergen-free foods high, if you are living in a mixed household, then you don't have the stuff that's full of an allergen that you might have that somebody else could eat dropping down on it, right? So keep them in separate containers or even a separate cupboard is even better, so that it just takes that risk away. And keep the allergen food low. Use dedicated knives. I keep my stuff in a separate drawer, and I use, if I have plastic, it's mine. Metal is easier to wash, so that I can share with. But I always wash it before I use it if it comes from somebody else's drawer, which has helped me a lot. And wipe things down with a dedicated cloth. If you have to wipe up the crumbs from somebody else, use a paper towel or a different cloth, get those crumbs up, and then use a dedicated cloth. And use your dedicated cloth to wash your utensils. Does that make sense? Because if they're little allergen traps, those cloths. And remember that flour's like having bacon, it connects to everything. Right? So it can hang in the air for 36 to 48 hours. So that's why I always say there's no such thing as a gluten-free pizza, because you walk into that pizza store, I've talked to so many people, they say, you know, I've gone to these restaurants, I've been on vacation this whole time, and I had no problems, I haven't gotten sick until last night. I don't know why, I don't know what happened. I said, what did you eat? And they always say gluten-free pizza. Because that flour, you know, you've got a regular pizza made over here, they have a nice dedicated little station over here for your pizza. Make your gluten-free pizza, that flour ends up on your pizza. Maybe, maybe not, but do you want to take that chance? I don't, but I suffered a lot. So I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. And you don't want to get to that point where you're suffering so much that you learn by trial and error and fire. You want to learn first, so you don't have to put yourself through that. Beware of the crannies. Mixers and equipment have parts where allergens can hide. It's another reason why bakeries can't be mixed. They have to be dedicated because those mixers have a lot of parts. The dough can get stuck up there. And if you're cooking, you know, baking for somebody and you use the same mixer, it's a little dangerous. So you may want to have a separate mixer at home. Latte machines. I know somebody who's very allergic to milk who likes to go and get her latte in the morning, and she said it's fine. I don't chance it, again, because I've suffered. I just am not going to chance it. But that milk can get stuck in those little steamy ones, even if they're cleaning it. It's not bacteria, it's a protein, it's sticky. It's not killed, it just sticks there, right? Toasters and toaster ovens. You know, you can't use the same toaster as somebody else that has regular bread in there because of the crumbs. And crumbs are sneaky. If you got bread in the freezer, it gets on your ice. You take the bread out, it falls on the packaging of your organic gluten-free beans. You open up those string beans, you know, there's the crumbs falling into the beans. So that's another reason why you have to lift and separate. So it's something to keep aware of. And finger licking lotion. One day, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to put this lotion on my hands. I don't know if this is gluten-free or not. So, you know, and I wash my hands. I have a habit of putting lotion on my hands and then doing some stuff and going and cooking, right? So I'm thinking, I'm making, you know, chicken right now. And I'm getting the lotion all over the chicken. Even though it's kind of off my hands, there's still residue on there. Or I go up and I wash my hands after I cook, and I go up and eat the chicken. And, you know, I'm like, I'm like, okay, well, I just ate the lotion, right? So you wash your hair, your eyes, your nose, your mouth. All are direct little transport systems to your own internal system. So there's research out there now that says that people with celiac disease have to be careful of cosmetics because they're loaded with gluten. For that very reason. It's too big to get through the particles on your skin. Like the smoker's patch will zoom, get that drug right into your system really quickly. The hormone patches will, boom, get into the right very quickly. The particles for gluten, they say, is too big to do that. But it will get in your eyes and your nose and your mouth really easily. I started watching that. I'm like, wow, I lick my lips all the time. I'm shampooing my hair and it gets in my eyes. And I'm like, this isn't good. So I dumped that too. Nail polish. You got kids who bite their fingernails? There's a great gluten-free nail polish down there, Kiki Pure and Simple. If you've got, especially kids or adults, I use it too. What else was I going to say about that? Oh, and if you have skin sensitivity to any of these allergens, then definitely get a gluten-free lotion or nut-free lotion or a soy-free lotion. So this is where this fares so good, because you can find your brands. There are great brands that serve multiple allergies. There's a lot of producers out there that are doing it right. Go find them, talk to them, pick up products, see what will work for you. And you have a great chance of being faithful to these brands. And you'd want to check the labels once in a while. You want to keep your health and your food kind of in sync. You might have developed something new or something has changed. Always just kind of keep that label reading in your vocabulary. But it makes it so much easier if you can find your brands and if you can stick to them. Then it's you can relax. Another thing is get out of the box. Don't ever eat what you can't pronounce. You turn the box over, you turn the bottle over. If you can't pronounce it, don't eat it. If you don't know what that is, don't eat it. If you want to know what that is, go on the internet and look it up. And it will take you a while. But you might find that you can eat it. There may be some chemical-like name that is perfectly okay for you to eat and you feel fine about it. But don't eat what you can't pronounce. Use more whole foods, and you have to learn to cook a little bit more. It's a little bit safer if you get out of the box. And less processed food, because just because it says gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy. Sometimes some of these products will add a lot of extra sugar and not very good fats, even though good fats are good for us. And step number 9 is find your tribe. There are people who support you out there. The brands, there's great brands that are supporting you, but there's also people in your lives, right? So find the people who really want to understand and who want to help you, and make it easy for them to help you. If they're cooking dinner for you, bring over a dish that you made that that you can eat. Say, cook whatever you want. I'll bring something. If they insist on cooking for you, say, you know what, I'm going to have to know what these ingredients are. Is that okay? And go over and help them or give them a list. Really be diligent about it. You don't have to get sick every time you go to somebody's house. Nobody wants to invite me over for dinner, which is really sad. But I don't blame them. I don't want to go either, unless I cook. So, and luckily I love to cook, so that's a kind of a bonus for me. But there's a few people in my life who really want to cook for me, and they will sit there with me and let me dictate exactly what goes where. And I love those people, I appreciate those people, and they can never do any wrong as far as I'm concerned. So I always feel grateful to them. Even get a little teary when I talk about them. And know that you're not alone, because this can be really isolating. Food issues, food is so social, right? It's so social. That's how we show some of us show our love and affection by cooking for someone. That's how I am, or receiving that food. And it's horrible to not be able to receive that food from the people that are offering it to you. So it feels very isolating. But know that you're not alone. I mean, look downstairs. There's all those people. There's 1,500 something people at this fair. Something. Yeah. And there's millions of people out there like you. And there's lots of support groups. If you're finding that you're having a hard time, there's my website. There's a lot of great cooking websites. Ilana's Pantry is fantastic. Nourished Kitchen is fantastic. They have a lot of gluten-free, allergen-free recipes on their site. We have some recipes too that are really good. And there's support groups like Rockford Allergy Support Group. They do a lot with peanut allergies in school. Just find the people that will support you. And that's the 10 steps.